They said Tanzania was burning. The images were everywhere. Smoke rising over Dar es Salaam, soldiers in the streets and crowds shouting "Haki yetu," meaning our right. Every major outlet repeated the same story. Chaos, collapse, crisis. But when you actually walk those streets and listen, you realize it's not that simple. The headlines show the fire but never what lit it. They show the anger but not the heartbreak behind it. This isn't just about protests, it's about a nation arguing with its own reflection. It's fear colliding with faith, silence crashing into truth. What's happening in Tanzania isn't a country falling apart. It's a country refusing to stay quiet any longer. When you stand in the middle of those crowds, it doesn't sound like rage, it sounds like exhaustion. The kind that comes from pretending everything's fine when it's not. You see people just standing there, hands on their heads, wondering how the land once called peaceful became a place where soldiers outnumber voters. The cameras catch the flames but not the faces. They film the clashes but never the quiet between them. Because chaos makes better TV. But when you really listen, you find that this chaos isn't confusion. It's clarity. These people know exactly what they're fighting for. Truth that isn't pre-approved by the state. Elections that feel like choices instead of instructions. Leaders who don't hide behind slogans like Uhuru and Mendilio, while signing deals citizens never see. They're fighting to be heard in a country that loves to say we are united, but rarely proves it. For decades, Tanzania's calm reputation was sold as proof of progress. But calm isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just pressure pretending to behave. Walk through Dar es Salaam today and you can feel the shift. Conversations once whispered are now shouted in buses and cafes. Taxi drivers talk politics. Students debate in the open. It's like the whole country suddenly remembered it has a voice, and no one knows how to lower it anymore. It's messy, yes, but it's honest. And honesty scares power more than any protest ever could. The media wants you to think Tanzania is losing control. But what if this isn't loss? What if it's liberation? What if this noise is democracy learning to speak Swahili again? When protests broke out, the images looked brutal. Burned posters, tear gas, soldiers firing into crowds. But beneath that smoke was something deeper. The country wasn't breaking down. It was breaking open. And maybe that's what growth looks like. Painful, loud, necessary. So how did a nation so proud of its calm end up in smoke? The answer lies in the silence that came before it. Before the election, Tanzania looked calm on the surface, but the air was heavy. Like everyone already knew the ending to a story they didn't write. The ruling party, Chama cha Mapinduzi or CCM, has been in power for over 60 years. That's not governance anymore, that's inheritance. The opposition didn't stand a chance. Tundu Lissu, one of the loudest opposition voices, was arrested under cybercrime and treason charges. Another challenger, Luhaga Mpina, was disqualified. It was like setting up a football match and arresting the other team before kickoff. Still, polling stations opened, people lined up and cameras rolled. It looked like democracy until you touched it. Then you realized it was theater. When the results came in, 97.6% for President Samia Suluhu Hassan, people didn't cheer. They paused. 97%? Even God doesn't get that kind of score. The next morning, state media celebrated the triumph of democracy. Meanwhile, the streets filled with quiet, dangerous anger. Not surprise, betrayal. Because this wasn't about losing an election. It was realizing the election was never really theirs. The protests didn't begin because people suddenly became violent, they began because people finally stopped being polite. Tanzanians have always been calm, respectful, almost gentle in defiance. But this time the calm snapped. One young man listening to the results on an old radio laughed bitterly. Even God doesn't win by 97%. Western media called it unrest. But it was revelation. A country realizing that democracy without choice is just dictatorship with good manners. Then came the blackout. Around 10 p.m. the night after the election, phones froze. WhatsApp, Facebook, X gone. The government called it a temporary security measure. But when you shut down the internet, you don't just stop communication, you stop connection. Hospitals couldn't coordinate. Banks froze transactions. Journalists couldn't verify anything. The silence spread faster than fear. And when the truth goes dark, rumors light up. Some whispered of mass arrests. Others claimed soldiers were taking over cities. Nobody knew what was real. That was the saddest part. It wasn't even the blackout itself, but how quickly it became normal. People just adjusted like they'd been here before. That's when it hit everyone. This wasn't about controlling chaos, it was about controlling connection. Because when people stop talking to each other, the state starts talking for everyone. But silence never lasts forever. When you take people's voices away long enough, they start shouting without words. Days later, whispers of truth slipped through the cracks. Not through news outlets, but through faces. The official report said 10 people were dead. Locals said hundreds. Nobody could prove it, not because it wasn't true, but because proving it had become illegal. When you control the numbers, you control the narrative. 10 deaths sound manageable. 700 sound like a massacre. And massacres ruin investor confidence. Western diplomats issued their usual lines. Deep concern. Urge restraint. But Tanzanians know those phrases are weather forecasts for human rights. They sound serious but mean nothing. The same governments expressing concern are the ones who trained the security forces and sold the tear gas now filling Tanzanian streets. That's the irony, foreign sympathy paid for the bullets. And when people are too afraid to count their dead, something deep has broken. Numbers can be denied, but absence echoes. And that echo brought Tanzania's youth back to the streets. They weren't marching for politics anymore. They were marching for proof, for the right to exist, to be counted. The silence that once buried fear began feeding courage. The youth who grew up online, who've seen the world through cracked phone screens, decided to fight back their own way. They didn't need leaders or party logos, just handwritten signs and their voices. Our voice cannot be deleted. You saw it on walls, buses, and school books. These kids don't fight with machetes, they fight with memory. They record everything. Every chant, every wound, every moment. Even when the internet's down, they keep filming for tomorrow. That they're not just resisting, they're archiving. Building a library of proof for a future that might finally listen. That's what scares power. People who stop fearing punishment. Once that fear dies, control begins to crumble. And these young Tanzanians aren't driven by hate, they're driven by hope. They don't want to destroy their country. They want to save it. They say, "We want the Tanzania they promised." That's the power of belief. Even now, after everything, they still believe in Tanzania, just not in who's running it. Yes, some protests turned violent. Some kids got hurt. But that's what awakening looks like: uneven, emotional, human. This isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's recognition. It's saying, we're here. We matter. We remember. You can shut off the signal, but not the story. Meanwhile, the government keeps pointing to its achievements: the standard gauge railway, the Mwalimu hydropower dam, new highways, ports, towers. They say, look how we're building. And they're right, Tanzania is building. But progress isn't supposed to leave people behind. You can pour concrete all day, but if the person walking on it can't afford lunch, that's not development, that's decoration. Whenever someone questions this version of progress, the answer is always the same: we're doing this for stability. As if justice is a luxury, not a foundation. The leaders talk proudly about sovereignty, how they don't bow to the IMF or the West. And that's rare in Africa today. But sovereignty isn't just rejecting outsiders. It's respecting insiders. You can't shout independence abroad while silencing your own people at home. And yet, Western media still claps. They call Tanzania a model of African stability. Because to them, success means stable contracts, not stable communities. They don't care if citizens can vote. They care if investors can land safely. That's what makes Tanzania's story so complicated. It's a nation that's both the problem and the possibility. Brave on the outside, brutal on the inside. A country wearing armor to face the world, but turning that armor on its own people. Real strength isn't built on silence. Progress isn't supposed to mean intimidation. Because if you have to silence people to show you're moving forward, maybe you're walking in the wrong direction. So ask yourself, can you build a future while breaking the very people meant to live in it? Because if progress needs fear to survive, is it really progress? Tanzania isn't collapsing, it's transforming. Not the story of a country losing control, but one finally learning to speak for itself. Maybe this is what growth looks like: painful, loud, and unstoppable.